A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Solitude's Price. Maeve's hands were stained green from crushing nettle leaves when the first snowflake landed on her wooden workbench. She paused, watching it melt against the warm wood, leaving behind a tiny wet mark that would dry within moments. Winter was coming early this year. She could feel it in her bones, in the way the forest had gone quiet over the past week, in how the deer had already moved to lower ground. She returned to her work, grinding the nettle with practiced movements in her stone mortar. The paste would help old Greta in the village with her joint pain. Not that Greta ever thanked her properly, but Maeve had stopped expecting gratitude 2 years ago. She'd stopped expecting much of anything, really. Her cabin sat on the border between the Silver Creek territory and the unclaimed wilderness beyond. It was a simple structure of stone and timber, built by her mother's hands before illness had taken her 3 years past. The single room held everything Maeve owned. A narrow bed pushed against the far wall, the workbench where she prepared her medicines, shelves lined with clay jars, and dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, and a stone fireplace that provided the only heat when winter storms howled outside. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and no one could take it from her. Maeve transferred the nettle paste into a small clay pot, sealed it with wax, and set it aside. Her fingers moved to her left shoulder without conscious thought, tracing the area through the fabric of her worn brown dress. The phantom ache was always there, a reminder of the worst day of her life. 2 years. 2 years since Osric had stood before the entire Silver Creek pack and declared her unworthy. 2 years since he'd spoken the words that still echoed in her nightmares. "Your scent is too weak. You bring shame to the position of Luna. I, Osric of Silver Creek, reject you as my mate." The laughter had been worse than his words. Pack members she'd known since childhood had laughed as she'd stumbled away from the ceremonial circle, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Someone had spat at her feet. She couldn't remember who. The faces had blurred together in her memory, transformed into a mass of cruel smiles and mocking eyes. Her mother had died the year before, taken by a lung sickness that no amount of healing herbs could cure. Maeve had watched her waste away over months, helpless despite all her knowledge of plants and remedies. When her mother finally slipped away, Maeve had been left with nothing but the cabin, her mother's books on healing, and memories of gentler times. So when Osric rejected her, she had nowhere to go, no family to return to, no one who would stand beside her against the pack's judgment. She'd left that very night, walking through darkness until she reached this cabin at the territory's edge. The structure had stood empty since her mother's death, slowly falling into disrepair. Maeve had spent weeks making it livable again, patching the roof, clearing out the debris, and slowly rebuilding a life from the wreckage of her old one. The isolation had been difficult at first. Long days passed with no one to talk to except the birds and the occasional deer that wandered too close. But gradually, Maeve had adapted. She learned which berries were safest to eat, which streams ran clear year-round, and which parts of the forest to avoid when rogue wolves passed through. She made her living selling remedies in the small villages that dotted the region. Most people didn't know she was a shifter, didn't know about her Omega status or her rejection. To them, she was simply the strange woman who lived in the woods and made medicines that actually worked. It was a lonely existence, but loneliness was safer than risking her heart again. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Visitors were rare. Most villagers left payment for their medicines on her doorstep and departed quickly, uncomfortable with entering a shifter's home, even if they didn't fully understand what she was. Maeve crossed the small space and opened the heavy wooden door. A thin girl of perhaps 12 stood outside, shivering in a dress too light for the dropping temperature. "Please," the girl said, her voice trembling. "My brother. He's sick, burning with fever. Mother sent me to beg for help." Maeve's healer instincts kicked in immediately. "How long has he had the fever?" 3 days. "It keeps getting worse." 3 days. That was serious, especially for a child. Maeve grabbed her leather satchel from its hook by the door and began filling it with supplies. Willow bark for the fever, elderflower for sweating out the illness, honey to soothe any throat inflammation. "What's your name?" she asked as she worked. Bess. Well, Bess, we'll do everything we can for your brother. Lead the way. The girls' village was an hour's walk through increasingly heavy snow. By the time they arrived, Maeve's thin cloak was soaked through, and her teeth were chattering. The child's home was a small cottage with a thatched roof, smoke rising from a central chimney. Inside, a woman who looked worn beyond her years sat beside a cot, where a boy of perhaps 8 lay sweating and shaking. The mother's eyes widened when she saw Maeve. "You came?" she breathed. "I wasn't sure you would." "A child is sick," Maeve replied simply, kneeling beside the cot. "That's all that matters." She examined the boy quickly. High fever, rapid pulse, signs of infection in his lungs. Serious, but treatable if she acted fast. She prepared a tea from the willow bark and elderflower, adding honey to make it palatable, and gently lifted the boy's head to help him drink. "He needs to sweat out the fever," she explained to the mother. "Keep him warm, but not too warm. Give him this tea every few hours. I'll leave you enough for 3 days. If the fever doesn't break by then, send for me again." As she worked, Maeve felt the familiar pull of her healing gift. It would be so easy to simply place her hands on the boy's chest and draw out the infection directly. Her mother had possessed the same gift, though she'd warned Maeve repeatedly about its cost. "Every healing takes something from you," her mother had said during Maeve's training. "A piece of your own life force. Use it sparingly, only when there's no other choice." So Maeve relied on herbs and knowledge, saving her gift for true emergencies. The boy would recover with proper care. He didn't need her to sacrifice her own strength for him. She stayed until the boy drank the entire cup of tea, then showed the mother how to prepare more. The woman pressed 2 copper coins into Maeve's palm, apologizing that it wasn't more. "This is fine," Maeve assured her. "Just follow my instructions and he'll be well soon." The walk back to her cabin seemed longer in the dark. Snow fell steadily now, covering the forest floor in a blanket of white. Maeve pulled her damp cloak tighter and hurried her pace. She knew these woods well, but winter made everything more dangerous. Ice could hide treacherous footing, and wolves, both shifter and natural, grew desperate when food became scarce. She was perhaps halfway home when she heard the first howl. It came from the south, distant but clear in the cold air. Her steps faltered. That wasn't a natural wolf. The tone was wrong, carrying an intelligence and fury that spoke of shifter origin. Another howl answered, this one closer, then another, and another. Maeve broke into a run. Shifters fighting in these woods meant danger for anyone caught between them, and she was too far from her cabin to reach it safely. She veered off the main path, heading for a cluster of rocks she'd discovered months ago. It wasn't much shelter, but it was better than being caught in the open. The sounds of fighting grew louder behind her. Snarls and yelps of pain echoed through the trees. Maeve pressed herself against the cold stone, trying to make herself as small as possible. Then she saw them. Massive shapes moving between the trees, locked in brutal combat. Even in the darkness and falling snow, she could tell these were large wolves, alphas probably, given their size and the raw power she could sense even from this distance. One wolf in particular drew her eye. Pure white, larger than all the others, moving with deadly grace despite being surrounded. He fought against at least 10 opponents, maybe more. As Maeve watched in frozen horror, the white wolf took down 3 attackers in rapid succession, his jaws finding throats with terrible precision. But there were too many. Even as he fought, more wounds appeared on his magnificent coat. Blood stained the snow beneath his paws. He was tiring, his movements growing slower. Maeve knew she should stay hidden. This wasn't her fight. Getting involved in pack politics had only ever brought her pain, but she'd never been able to watch another creature suffer without trying to help. It was her greatest weakness, and perhaps her only true virtue. The white wolf went down, disappearing beneath a pile of attackers. Maeve heard a sound that chilled her blood, a wolf's scream of agony. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the attacking wolves scattered. They melted back into the forest, leaving their victim bleeding in the snow. Maeve waited, counting her heartbeats. When she was certain the attackers were truly gone, she emerged from her hiding spot and approached the fallen wolf cautiously. He was still alive, but barely. Massive wounds covered his body, and the snow around him was stained dark with blood. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and labored. Maeve knelt beside him, her healer's assessment happening automatically. Multiple deep lacerations, possible broken ribs, severe blood loss. He needed immediate help, or he would die within the hour. She should leave him. A wolf this size, this powerful, was dangerous even wounded. If he woke and saw her as a threat, he could kill her before she could defend herself. But she'd never turned away from a dying creature in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. Her mother had taught her that healing was sacred, that it transcended pack politics and personal safety. "You're either going to kill me, or I'm going to save your life," Maeve muttered, grabbing the wolf's front legs. "Let's hope it's the second one." Chapter 2. Blood in the Snow. Dragging the massive white wolf through the snow nearly killed Maeve before she'd gone 10 paces. He must have weighed 3 times what she did, all muscle and bone and bloodied fur. Her boots slipped on ice-covered roots, and twice she fell completely, landing hard on her knees in the frozen undergrowth. "You couldn't have collapsed closer to my cabin, could you?" she gasped, hauling on his front legs again. The wolf didn't respond. He was deeply unconscious, which was probably the only reason she was still alive. A wolf this size wouldn't tolerate being handled by a stranger under normal circumstances. The storm was getting worse. Snow fell so thick now that Maeve could barely see 5 feet ahead. Her wet cloak felt like it weighed as much as the wolf, dragging at her shoulders and tangling around her legs. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves. She focused on moving forward. 1 step, then another. Pull, rest, pull again. The cabin couldn't be far now. She'd walked this path 1,000 times. When she finally saw the dark shape of her home through the swirling snow, relief nearly made her weep. She dragged the wolf the final distance to her door, then faced a new problem. How was she supposed to get him inside? The doorway was narrow, built for humans, not massive shifter wolves. Maeve ended up having to push from behind while guiding his head and shoulders through first, then working his hindquarters around the frame. By the time she got him fully inside, she was soaked in a mixture of his blood and her own sweat. The wolf lay motionless on her floor, taking up nearly half the cabin's available space. Blood pooled beneath him, seeping between the floorboards. Maeve bolted the door and immediately set to building up the fire. She would need hot water, lots of it, and light to see what she was working with. While water heated in her largest pot, she gathered supplies: clean cloth for bandages, her sewing kit with the curved needle her mother had used for closing wounds, dried yarrow to stop bleeding, comfrey root paste for the wounds themselves, and her bottle of strong spirits for cleaning both her tools and the deepest cuts. The wolf's breathing was getting more labored. Maeve knelt beside him and began examining his injuries properly. What she found made her stomach turn. Deep slashes covered his sides and back, some down to the muscle. His right front leg was badly torn, possibly the bone fractured beneath. Puncture wounds dotted his neck and shoulders where teeth had found purchase. One ear was nearly shredded. He'd been fighting for his life, and it showed. "Who were you?" Maeve whispered, beginning to clean the blood away from the worst wounds. "What did you do to make so many enemies?" The water came to a boil. She added yarrow to it and let it steep while she cut away matted fur from around the deepest lacerations. The wolf didn't stir, even when she had to cut close to sensitive areas. That worried her more than the wounds themselves. He should have been showing some response to pain. She worked through the night in a rhythm her mother had taught her. Clean, assess, close what could be closed, pack with healing herbs what couldn't. The curved needle flashed in the firelight as she stitched wound after wound, her fingers growing sticky with blood despite how often she cleaned them. The worst gash ran from his left shoulder down across his ribs. It gaped open, revealing muscle and the white glint of bone beneath. Maeve had to pause before starting on it, steeling herself. If she made a mistake here, if she didn't close it properly, infection would set in, and all her other work would be meaningless. "Don't you die on me," she told the unconscious wolf. "I didn't drag you all the way here just to have you die on my floor." She started stitching. Her mother had always said to make the stitches close but not too tight, to leave room for swelling. Maeve's hands remembered the lesson, even as her mind grew foggy with exhaustion. Stitch, knot, cut. Stitch, knot, cut. The gash slowly closed under her careful work. Dawn was breaking by the time she finished the last bandage. Every wound was cleaned, stitched or packed, and wrapped in clean cloth. The wolf's breathing seemed slightly stronger, though he still hadn't regained consciousness. Maeve sat back on her heels and looked at what she'd done. The white wolf was now a patchwork of bandages and healing paste, barely recognizable under all the wrapping. But he was breathing steadily, and the bleeding had stopped. She'd done all she could with conventional healing methods, but it wouldn't be sufficient. She could see that already. Some of the wounds were too deep, the damage too severe. He needed more than herbs and stitches. He needed her gift. Maeve's hand went to her shoulder again, that unconscious gesture of memory and pain. Using her healing gift always came with a price. Every injury she took from another, every illness she drew out, left its mark on her. Not physically, perhaps, but she felt it. A draining of something essential, a piece of her life force given away. Her mother had died using her gift too freely. Near the end, trying to heal others in the village, even as her own body failed. Maeve had sworn she wouldn't make the same mistake. She would use her gift only in the most desperate circumstances, only when there was no other choice. She looked at the wolf's labored breathing, at the way his body shuddered with each inhale. Without her gift, he probably wouldn't survive the day. "Moon, take me for a fool," she muttered. Maeve placed both hands on the wolf's chest, feeling the rapid flutter of his heartbeat beneath her palms. She closed her eyes and reached for that well of power inside her, the gift her mother had passed down through bloodlines older than memory. Healing energy flowed out of her and into the wolf. She felt his injuries as if they were her own, the deep ache of broken ribs, the burning pain of torn muscle, the sharp agony of punctured lung tissue. All of it flooded into her awareness, and she began the careful work of knitting it back together. She focused on the most critical injuries first: the punctured lung that was filling with fluid, the broken ribs threatening to pierce vital organs. Her energy wrapped around the damaged tissue and encouraged it to heal faster, bones to set properly, tears to close. The pain was extraordinary. Maeve had forgotten how much it hurt to use her gift this way. Every injury she healed sent echoes of suffering through her own body. She gasped, but didn't stop, didn't pull her hands away. The wolf needed this. He would die without it. She moved on to the lesser wounds, though none of them were truly minor. The torn leg muscle, the damaged tendons in his shoulder, the countless lacerations. Her energy touched each one, speeding the healing process from weeks to minutes. By the time she finished, Maeve was shaking violently. Her vision had gone dark at the edges, and she could barely hold herself upright. The cabin spun around her. She tried to pull her hands back from the wolf's chest, but her arms wouldn't obey. The last thing she remembered was the wolf's eyes opening. Brilliant amber gold, sharp with intelligence that was far too knowing for any normal wolf. They focused on her with an intensity that would have frightened her if she'd had any fear left in her. Then darkness claimed her completely. Chapter 3. The Mark of Kings. The white wolf remained in Maeve's cabin for 3 days, hovering between life and death while she poured every skill she possessed into keeping him breathing. On the first day, she changed his bandages 4 times. Each time, fresh blood soaked through the cloth faster than she would have liked. His breathing stayed shallow and rapid, his body burning with fever that made her fear infection had already set in, despite her careful cleaning of every wound. Maeve prepared poultices of comfrey and golden seal, spreading the paste thick over the worst injuries before wrapping them again in clean linen. She brewed willow bark tea and managed to get small amounts down his throat by lifting his massive head and pouring the liquid carefully past his teeth. Most of it dribbled out, but she hoped some made it to his stomach. "You're being a terrible patient," she informed him as she worked. Talking to the unconscious wolf helped fill the oppressive silence of the cabin. "The least you could do is wake up and shift so I can treat you properly. Human injuries are much easier to bandage than wolf ones." The wolf's only response was a slight twitch of one ear. Even that small movement made Maeve's heart lift with hope. Any sign of awareness was better than none. She slept in brief snatches, sitting upright with her back against the wall where she could watch him constantly. Every time his breathing changed pattern, she jerked awake, certain he was either recovering or dying. Each time he remained the same, trapped in whatever dark place his consciousness had fled to. On the second day, the fever broke. Maeve woke from one of her brief naps to find the wolf's breathing had finally slowed to something approaching normal. When she touched his flank, his skin felt warm, but no longer burning. She changed his bandages again, and was relieved to see that several of the smaller wounds had already begun to close. "There you are," she murmured, relief making her voice shake. "I was starting to think I'd lost you." She prepared a thin broth from dried meat, and got more of it down his throat this time. He swallowed reflexively, a good sign that his body's natural functions were returning. Maeve allowed herself to hope that he might actually survive. But hope was dangerous. She'd learned that lesson thoroughly over the past 2 years. So she pushed the feeling down and focused on the practical work of keeping him alive 1 hour at a time. The wolf's eyes opened for the first time late on the second day. Maeve was changing the bandage on his shoulder when she felt him tense beneath her hands. She looked up and found herself staring into eyes of brilliant amber gold. They weren't the eyes of an animal. Intelligence burned in those depths, sharp and assessing. He watched her with an intensity that made her breath catch. This was no ordinary wolf, no simple shifter. The power radiating from him even in his weakened state spoke of something far more significant. "Easy," Maeve said softly, the same tone she'd use with any frightened creature. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe here." The wolf continued to stare at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, his eyes closed again. But Maeve noticed his breathing had changed. He was no longer unconscious, just resting, conserving his strength. She finished wrapping his shoulder with hands that trembled slightly. Having those knowing eyes on her had been unsettling in a way she couldn't quite name. She'd felt exposed, as if he could see through her skin to all the broken pieces inside. On the third day, Maeve woke before dawn to find the wolf watching her. He was fully alert now, his amber eyes tracking her every movement as she built up the fire and set water to boil. The wounds were healing remarkably fast, faster than should have been possible even for a shifter. Several of the gashes she'd stitched had already knitted together enough that she could remove the threads. "You heal quickly," she commented as she worked. "That's fortunate. I was worried about infection." The wolf made a sound low in his throat. Not quite a growl, but close. Maeve glanced at his face and could have sworn he looked frustrated, as if he wanted to communicate but couldn't in his current form. "If you're strong enough to shift, you should do it," she said. "I have clothes that might fit you. They belong to a traveler who died in these woods last winter. I found them in an abandoned pack." She wasn't sure if he could understand her. Some shifters retained full human comprehension in wolf form, while others lost much of their cognitive function during the change. But she had a feeling this wolf understood every word. He didn't shift, though. Perhaps he was still too weak. The transformation took energy even when a shifter was healthy. Maeve spent the day preparing more medicines and checking her stores. The unexpected guest had depleted her supplies more than she'd anticipated. She would need to gather more herbs once the weather cleared, assuming she could find anything useful under the snow. That evening, as darkness fell, and Maeve prepared a simple meal of bread and dried meat for herself, the wolf finally moved. He lifted his head, testing his strength. His legs shifted beneath him as he attempted to stand. "Careful," Maeve warned, moving toward him. "You're not ready for that yet." But the wolf ignored her. With a tremendous effort, he pushed himself to his feet. He swayed dangerously, his legs shaking with the strain. Maeve put her hands out to steady him, pressing against his shoulder. The moment her skin made contact with his fur, everything changed. Heat exploded through Maeve's body, starting from her hands and racing up her arms. The mark on her shoulder, the strange silver pattern that had appeared after she'd healed him, suddenly burned with intensity that made her cry out. The wolf made a sound too, something between a whine and a howl. Then power surged between them. Maeve felt the wolf's pain, his exhaustion, the lingering damage in his body that her healing hadn't fully addressed. But more than that, she felt something else. A connection, deep and primal, that had formed between them during those hours when she'd poured her gift into saving his life. The wolf's instincts rose up, overwhelming whatever control he maintained. He moved faster than Maeve could react, his head whipping around. She felt the sharp pressure of teeth against her left shoulder. Not breaking skin, but pressing hard. The burning intensified. The silver mark on her shoulder flared with light, visible even through her dress. Maeve would have screamed if she'd had breath, but the sensation had driven all air from her lungs. Then it was done. The wolf released her and collapsed back to the floor, breathing hard. Maeve stumbled backward until her back hit the wall, her hand flying to her shoulder. The area throbbed with heat, but when she pulled her dress aside to look, there was no bite wound. The silver mark, however, had changed. It was larger now, the pattern more intricate, and at its center, where the lines spiraled inward, was a new symbol. A crown rendered in lines so fine, they looked like silver thread beneath her skin. "What did you do?" Maeve whispered, her voice shaking. "What did you do to me?" The wolf's amber eyes met hers. In them, she saw regret, confusion, but also something that looked almost like triumph. He collapsed fully then, his brief burst of strength exhausted. Within moments, his breathing had evened out into sleep. Natural sleep this time, not unconsciousness. Maeve slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her hand still pressed to her marked shoulder. Her mind raced, trying to understand what had just happened. The mark was no accidental result of using her gift too strongly. The wolf had marked her deliberately, pressing his teeth to the exact spot where the silver pattern lay, and somehow, that action had changed the mark, added to it, made it into something more. She should be terrified, should throw the wolf out despite his weakened state, should run far from whatever bond he'd tried to forge. But Maeve found she couldn't move. Exhaustion from 3 days of constant vigilance had finally caught up with her. Her eyes closed almost against her will. The last thing she noticed before sleep claimed her was that the mark on her shoulder had stopped burning. Now it just felt warm, like a hand pressed gently against her skin. When Maeve woke, morning light was streaming through the window. She jerked upright, her neck protesting the awkward angle she'd slept at. Her eyes went immediately to where the wolf had been. The space was empty. She scrambled to her feet, searching the small cabin frantically, but he was truly gone. The door stood slightly ajar, cold air streaming in. He must have shifted during the night and left while she slept. On her table, arranged with obvious deliberation, sat a leather pouch heavy with coins. Maeve opened it with shaking fingers. Gold. More gold than most people saw in a lifetime. Payment for saving his life, she supposed. Payment for the healing that had nearly killed her. But it felt wrong somehow. Like payment for something far more significant than simple medical care. She went to the door and looked out at the snow-covered forest. Fresh wolf tracks led away from her cabin, already being filled in by new snowfall. They headed north, toward the heart of the kingdom where she'd never been. Maeve closed the door and barred it. She returned to the table and stared at the gold, at the fortune that should have thrilled her. Instead, she felt hollow. Her hand went to her shoulder again, tracing the mark through her dress. The pattern was still warm, still tingling with latent energy. Whatever the wolf had done, it was permanent. The mark would be part of her now, a reminder of the night she'd saved a stranger's life, and he'd somehow changed hers in return. She had no name for what she felt. Loss, perhaps, though that made no sense. She'd never truly had him to lose. Confusion, certainly. And underneath it all, a strange sense of anticipation. As if this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The mark pulsed once against her skin. A sensation almost like a heartbeat. Maeve shivered and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Whatever the white wolf had done, whatever this mark meant, she would have to live with it. She was used to living with scars, after all. What was one more, even if it glowed silver and carried the symbol of a crown? Chapter 4. Separation and Longing. 6 months passed like water through Maeve's fingers, each day blending into the next in a pattern of solitude and work that should have felt familiar, but somehow didn't anymore. The gold the white wolf had left bought her more than supplies. It bought her a kind of security she'd never known, the freedom to refuse work that didn't suit her, to help those who couldn't pay without worrying about her own survival. She expanded her herb garden, built a small greenhouse against the south wall of her cabin using glass panes purchased from a traveling merchant, and filled her shelves with rare medicinal plants that had once been beyond her means. The villagers noticed her improved circumstances. She told them the same lie each time someone asked. She'd found a cache of old coins buried in the forest, probably hidden by some long-dead traveler. Most accepted the story without question. Those who didn't kept their suspicions to themselves. But the gold couldn't buy what Maeve truly wanted, though it took her weeks to admit what that even was. She wanted answers. She wanted to understand the mark on her shoulder and why it had appeared. She wanted to know who the White Wolf had been, and why he'd marked her before disappearing into the dawn. The mark itself remained a constant mystery. It never faded as she'd initially hoped. Instead, it seemed to settle into her skin, becoming as much a part of her as the green of her eyes, or the texture of her hair. The silver lines were visible when she looked for them, but easy to hide under clothing that covered her shoulders. What unsettled her more were the sensations that came with it. Sometimes, usually late at night when she was alone with her thoughts, the mark would grow warm, a gentle heat that felt almost like a touch, like someone's hand pressed against her shoulder in comfort or reassurance. Other times, she would feel pulses of emotion that didn't belong to her. Frustration, determination. Once, a wave of such profound weariness that she'd had to sit down until it passed. Maeve told herself she was imagining these things, that the mark was just a scar, nothing more, and the sensations were her mind playing tricks. But deep down, she knew better. Something connected her to the White Wolf still, some bond that distance couldn't break. She tried to research the phenomenon in her mother's books. The oldest texts mention bonds between mates, the way paired shifters could sense each other's emotions, and sometimes even thoughts. But Maeve had been rejected. She had no mate, and the White Wolf was a stranger who'd left without a word. Unless he hadn't meant to mark her. The thought occurred to Maeve one night as she lay in bed, her fingers tracing the silver pattern in the darkness. The wolf had still been fevered, still weak from his injuries. What if the marking had been an accident, his instincts taking over when he was too sick to control them? What if he'd woken that morning, realized what he'd done, and fled before she could demand explanations he couldn't give? The idea should have brought comfort. Instead, it made the hollow feeling in her chest worse. Spring came slowly to the frontier forest. Snow melted in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath. Maeve spent her days gathering the first herbs of the season, and her nights trying not to think about amber eyes that had looked at her with too much intelligence. She was collecting early mushrooms near a creek when the mark on her shoulder suddenly flared hot. Maeve gasped, nearly dropping her basket. The heat was intense but not painful, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. And beneath the heat, she felt something else. Danger. Fear not for himself, but for others. Battle rage held barely in check. "What's happening to you?" she whispered to the absent wolf, her hand pressed to her shoulder. The sensation faded after a few minutes, leaving Maeve shaken. She abandoned her mushroom gathering and hurried back to her cabin, needing the security of walls and a locked door, even though she knew they wouldn't protect her from whatever was happening through the mark. That night, she dreamed of white fur stained with blood, of snarling wolves and flashing steel, of a golden crown that felt more like a burden than an honor. She woke gasping, her nightdress soaked with sweat, the mark on her shoulder throbbing. The dreams continued for 3 nights. Each time, Maeve saw fragments of battles, of council rooms where men argued in voices she couldn't quite hear, of maps spread across tables showing territories she didn't recognize, and always at the center of it all, the sense of the White Wolf's presence, his determination, his isolation despite being surrounded by others. On the 4th night, Maeve didn't dream. Instead, she lay awake and finally admitted the truth she'd been avoiding. The White Wolf hadn't been ordinary. The power she'd felt in him, the way other shifters would probably have cowered in his presence, the sheer size of him, all of it pointed to one conclusion. He'd been an alpha, possibly one of significant rank and power, and he'd marked her, accidentally or not, creating a bond that should only exist between mates. The implications terrified her. If anyone discovered she carried an alpha's mark, Questions would arise that she couldn't answer. Why would a powerful alpha mark a rejected omega living alone on the frontier? What claim did he have on her? What obligations did the mark create? Maeve began wearing high-necked dresses exclusively, even as the weather warmed. She couldn't risk anyone seeing the silver pattern, especially not the crown symbol at its center. That felt particularly damning, though she didn't know enough about pack politics to understand why. Summer arrived, bringing with it the heat that made working in her greenhouse uncomfortable, but necessary. Maeve's reputation as a healer continued to grow. People came from farther away now, seeking her help for ailments other healers couldn't cure. She helped when she could, always careful never to use her gift where others might see. That power was too dangerous, too revealing. One afternoon, a merchant traveling through stopped at her cabin. He was an older man with kind eyes and a pack full of goods from the capital city. After Maeve sold him several jars of her salve for joint pain, he lingered, clearly wanting to talk. "You hear much news out here?" he asked. Maeve shook her head. "Very little. The frontier isn't known for gossip." Well, you might be interested to know there's been trouble in the capital. Civil war, they're calling it. 3 packs tried to overthrow the Alpha King. Been going on for months now." Maeve's blood went cold. Her hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder. "The Alpha King?" "Aye. Rain, his name is. Young for a king, but they say he's the most powerful alpha born in a century. The rebels thought they could take him down, but from what I hear, he's crushing them. Methodically, brutally. He's not a wolf to cross. Rain, the white wolf, had a name now, and he was fighting a war that explained the battle dreams, the sensations of danger and fury that pulsed through the mark." "Is he?" Maeve managed to keep her voice steady. "Winning, I mean?" "Seems to be, though the cost has been high. They say he drives himself without mercy, barely sleeps, takes every risk personally, rather than sending his warriors to do the dangerous work. Lost a lot of good wolves putting down the rebellion." The merchant shook his head. "But that's the way of kings, I suppose. The crown sits heavy on young shoulders." After the merchant left, Maeve sat at her table and stared at nothing. Rain. The Alpha King. She'd saved the most powerful shifter in the realm without knowing it, and he'd marked her in his fevered state before disappearing to fight a war. No wonder he hadn't returned. No wonder the mark sometimes pulsed with exhaustion and determination. He was fighting for his throne, for his kingdom. A rejected Omega healer on the frontier would be the least of his concerns. The knowledge should have brought relief. It explained everything, made sense of the mystery. But instead, Maeve felt that hollow ache in her chest deepen, because now she knew. The white wolf, Rain, was so far above her in status and power that they might as well have existed in different worlds. Whatever bond the mark represented, it could never be acknowledged. An Alpha King would need a mate of high birth and political value, not a frontier healer living in isolation. The mark pulsed warm against her skin as if in disagreement, but Maeve ignored it. She'd learned long ago not to hope for things beyond her reach. Autumn arrived, painting the forest in shades of gold and red. Maeve prepared for winter, stocking her cabin with supplies and drying herbs for the cold months ahead. The mark had become such a constant part of her that she barely noticed it anymore, except during those moments when it flared with emotions that weren't hers. She wondered sometimes if Rain felt her through the mark as well. Did he sense her loneliness during the long nights? Her quiet satisfaction when she healed someone successfully? Her occasional flashes of remembered pain when something triggered memories of her rejection? Probably not. The bond seemed one-sided, flowing from him to her, but not the reverse. Or perhaps an Alpha King had more important things to focus on than the emotions of an unknown Omega. 6 months after the White Wolf had left, Maeve stood in her cabin and looked at the gold coins she'd carefully saved. More than half still remained. She could live comfortably for years on what he'd given her, but the coins felt like a severance payment, a way to close the books on a debt and move on. She picked up one of the gold pieces and turned it over in her hands. On one side was stamped the royal crest, a crown above a crescent moon, the same crown symbol that marked her shoulder. "Who are you really?" she asked the empty cabin. "And what did you mean to do to me?" No answer came. There never was one. Maeve replaced the coin and went about her evening routine, trying not to think about amber eyes and the warmth of a mark that connected her to someone she would never see again. But that night, as she lay in bed, the mark pulsed with something new, not danger or exhaustion or battle fury. Something gentler, something that felt almost like longing. Maeve placed her hand over the mark and closed her eyes. Somewhere far away, an alpha king was fighting for his throne, and somehow, through whatever magic bound them, he was thinking of her. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it was the first thing in 6 months that made her feel less alone. Chapter 5. The Festival of Reckoning. Maeve had no intention of attending the Harvest Moon Festival in Millbrook. She avoided crowds and celebrations as a general rule, places where questions might be asked and lies would need to be told. But Petra, the baker's wife who'd become something close to a friend over the past year, had begged her to come. "You can't hide in that cabin forever," Petra had said during Maeve's last supply run to the village. "The festival has merchants from all over the region. Rare herbs you won't find anywhere else. Besides, you need the coin. Winter's coming and your remedies sell well at festivals." The argument about rare herbs had been what finally swayed her. Maeve's supplies of several key plants were running low, and winter would make gathering impossible. If she could purchase what she needed at the festival, she'd be set for the cold months ahead. So she found herself on the road to Millbrook on a crisp autumn morning, wearing the blue dress Petra had lent her. It was finer than anything Maeve owned, made of wool dyed a deep blue that reminded her of twilight. The sleeves were long and covered her shoulders completely, hiding the mark that had become such a constant part of her existence. Her hair was braided simply and pinned at the nape of her neck. She carried her basket of remedies, jars of salve and packets of dried herbs that she hoped to sell. The coins would help offset the cost of the supplies she planned to purchase. Millbrook was transformed for the festival. Colorful banners hung from every building, and the central square had been cleared for merchant stalls and entertainers. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air. Musicians played lively tunes on fiddles and drums, and children ran between the stalls laughing and shrieking. Maeve felt overwhelmed immediately. She'd grown too accustomed to silence and solitude. The noise and press of bodies made her want to flee back to her cabin. But she forced herself to find an empty space near the edge of the market and set up her modest display. The morning passed in a blur of transactions. Her remedies sold well, as Petra had predicted. People recognized quality when they saw it, even if they didn't know the healer behind the medicines. Maeve kept her head down and her interactions brief, taking coins and offering thanks without encouraging conversation. By midday, she'd sold more than half her stock and had accumulated a pleasant weight of copper and silver in her belt pouch. She was beginning to think the trip had been worthwhile when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Well, is that little Maeve I see?" She looked up slowly, her stomach sinking. Osric stood before her stall, dressed in fine clothes that spoke of wealth and status. His hair was shorter than she remembered, cut in the style favored by successful alphas. He looked prosperous and smug, every inch the respectable pack leader. Beside him stood a woman Maeve didn't recognize. She was beautiful in an obvious way, with long red hair that caught the sunlight and eyes of pale blue. Her dress was elaborate, embroidered with thread that might have been real gold. Jewelry glinted at her throat and wrists. This had to be Osric's new mate, the one he'd chosen after rejecting Maeve. "Osric," Maeve said quietly, hoping he would take the hint and move on. "I hope you're well." "Oh, I'm very well indeed." Osric's smile was sharp. "Allow me to introduce Elowen, my intended. We're to be formally mated next month. Quite the celebration planned." Elowen looked Maeve up and down with barely concealed disdain. "This is the one you mentioned? How quaint." Maeve felt her face heating but kept her expression neutral. "Congratulations on your upcoming mating. If you'll excuse me, I have customers waiting." She gestured vaguely to the empty space around her stall, but Osric didn't move. Instead, he leaned against the edge of her table, making himself comfortable. His eyes roamed over her worn basket and half-empty jars with obvious amusement. "Selling herbs now, are you? My, how the mighty have fallen. Though I suppose you were never very mighty to begin with." He laughed at his own joke. Alawan tittered beside him. "I make an honest living," Maeve said, her voice tight. "There's no shame in that." Of course not, of course not." Osric picked up one of her jars, examining it with exaggerated interest. "Though I must admit, I'm surprised to see you here. I'd heard you were living alone in the wilderness like some kind of hermit. Couldn't find another pack to take you in?" The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. Maeve felt the old shame rising, the memory of her rejection still sharp, despite 2 years of distance. She wanted to tell him that she'd chosen isolation, that she preferred her solitude to the cruelty of pack politics, but her throat had closed up, words trapped behind a wall of remembered humiliation. "Honestly, darling, must you torment the poor thing?" Elowen's voice dripped with false sympathy. "It's not her fault she was born defective. You're right, love. I'm being cruel." But Osric's smile suggested he was enjoying himself immensely. He raised his voice, drawing the attention of passers-by. "Tell me, Maeve, still mateless? Still searching for an alpha who'll overlook your inadequacies?" Several people had stopped to watch now, sensing drama. Maeve felt their eyes on her, judging, pitying. This was her nightmare made real, public humiliation all over again. "My personal life is none of your concern," she managed to say, though her voice shook. "Oh, but it is." Osric was enjoying himself now, playing to the growing crowd. "You see, Elowen was worried she'd offended you somehow. I had to assure her that you understood why I rejected you, that you knew it was for the best. An alpha of my standing couldn't possibly mate with an omega whose scent spoke of weakness. It would have been a disaster. You made your feelings quite clear 2 years ago," Maeve said. She was gripping the edge of her table so hard her knuckles had gone white. "There's no need to revisit them now, but that's where you're wrong. I think there's every need." Osric straightened up, addressing the crowd as much as Maeve. "You see, I've heard rumors. People saying I was too harsh with you, that I should have given you a chance. I want everyone here to understand that I made the right choice. Look at you, living alone, selling herbs like a peddler, still unmated after all this time. You're exactly what I sensed you were. Broken. Unable to attract any alpha of worth." The crowd murmured. Some faces showed sympathy for Maeve, but others nodded in agreement with Osric. Pack hierarchy was sacred among shifters. An alpha's judgment was rarely questioned, especially regarding mate selection. Maeve's shoulder had begun to burn. The mark, usually so quiet during the day, was heating rapidly beneath her dress. She pressed her hand to it instinctively, trying to soothe the sudden pain. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" Alawan's concern was transparently false. "Perhaps you should sit down. You look quite faint." "I'm fine," Maeve gritted out, but the burning was intensifying. It felt like fire spreading across her shoulder blade, down her arm, up her neck. What was happening? "She's probably overwhelmed by seeing you again, darling," Elowen said to Osric. "The poor thing still carries a torch for you, I'd wager." "How pathetic," Osric agreed. He leaned close to Maeve, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper that only she could hear. "You should have taken my offer to be a mistress when you had the chance. At least then you'd have some purpose. Now you're just a cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens to defective omegas who think they deserve more than they're worth." The burn on Maeve's shoulder flared into agony. She gasped, biting back a cry of pain. Tears sprang to her eyes unbidden, and she hated herself for showing weakness in front of Osric and his mate and all these strangers. And then everything changed. Every shifter in the marketplace felt it simultaneously. A presence, massive and overwhelming, approaching at impossible speed. The kind of power that made instincts scream in warning, that triggered the ancient submissive responses coded into every wolf's DNA. The festival noise died instantly. Musicians stopped mid-note. Merchants froze behind their stalls. Even the children stopped their games, sensing something momentous was happening. Maeve felt it through the mark as much as through her shifter senses. He was coming. Rain was coming, drawn by her distress through whatever bond connected them. And he was furious. The crowd began to part, people backing away without knowing why. A path cleared through the center of the marketplace. And then, bursting from the tree line at the edge of town, came the white wolf. He was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. larger than any wolf had right to be, moving with supernatural speed that blurred his form. His amber eyes were fixed on Maeve with such intensity that she couldn't look away. The wolf skidded to a stop 10 feet from her stall, sending up a spray of dirt. His sides heaved with exertion. Blood flecked his muzzle, suggesting he'd fought his way through something or someone to get here. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The white wolf commanded the space absolutely, his presence pinning everyone in place through sheer force of dominance. Then he shifted. The transformation was fluid and quick, fur melting into skin, shape changing from beast to man in the space of a heartbeat. And there stood Rain, the Alpha King, in the flesh. He was exactly as Maeve remembered from her dreams, the fragments she'd glimpsed through their connection. Tall and powerfully built, with golden hair that fell past his shoulders, and a beard that framed a face too handsome to be real. His eyes were still that stunning amber, and they were fixed on her with an expression of such raw concern that it stole her breath. He wore only leather trousers, his chest bare and marked with fresh scratches that were healing even as she watched. He looked like he'd run through half the kingdom without stopping, like nothing in the world could have kept him from reaching her. "Maeve," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion she couldn't name. The marketplace erupted in whispers. "That's the Alpha King. What's he doing here? Moon goddess, he's magnificent. Why is he looking at that healer woman?" But Rain ignored them all. He crossed the distance to Maeve in 3 long strides, his eyes never leaving her face. "Are you all right? I felt your pain through the bond. I felt your distress. What happened?" Maeve couldn't speak. Her mind was still trying to process the impossibility of his presence. The Alpha King had come for her, had felt her through the mark, and crossed whatever distance separated them to reach her. Osric, who'd gone pale as death the moment the white wolf appeared, found his voice. "Your Majesty, this is merely a misunderstanding." Rain's head turned slowly, his attention focusing on Osric with the precision of a predator selecting prey. "You. Who are you?" "Osric of Silver Creek Pack, Your Majesty." Osric bowed so low he was nearly bent double. "I meant no offense. I was simply speaking with an old acquaintance." "An old acquaintance." Rain's voice had gone deadly quiet. He looked back at Maeve, at the tears still wet on her cheeks, at the way she was clutching her shoulder, where the mark burned. "Is that what he was doing?" "Speaking with you." Maeve nodded mutely. "And these tears? This pain? They're simply from conversation?" She wanted to lie, to diffuse the situation before it escalated, but she'd never been good at lying. And something in Rain's eyes demanded truth. "He was reminding me of my rejection," she whispered, "telling me that I'm broken, worthless. He didn't know about—" She gestured helplessly between them. Rain's expression didn't change, but the temperature of the marketplace seemed to drop 10 degrees. When he spoke again, his voice carried command that made every shifter present instinctively lower their eyes. "This man rejected you as his mate? 2 years ago," Maeve confirmed. Rain turned back to Osric, who looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. "You rejected her. Why?" "Her scent, Your Majesty. It was wrong. Weak. It spoke of infertility, of defectiveness. Any alpha would have sensed the same." Osric was babbling now, desperate. "I swear I meant no disrespect to you. I didn't know she was connected to royalty. How could I have known?" "You couldn't have," Rain agreed. His hand reached out, hovering near Maeve's shoulder. "May I?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Gently, carefully, Rain pulled the fabric of her dress aside, exposing the silver mark on her shoulder, the mark that now bore a crown at its center, glowing faintly in the afternoon sunlight. The crowd gasped collectively. Even those who didn't understand pack politics recognized royal markings when they saw them. "This," Rain said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent marketplace, "is a claiming mark. My claiming mark, placed on my true mate 6 months ago. The woman you just called broken and worthless is destined to be your queen." Chapter 6. Truth and Claiming. The silence that followed Rain's declaration was absolute. Maeve could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. The Alpha King's mate. His queen. The words seemed impossible, too large for her to comprehend. Your Majesty. Osric's voice cracked. He was trembling now, all his earlier confidence shattered. Please, I didn't know. How could I have known? She was just a frontier healer living alone. There were no signs that she was marked by royalty. Rain's amber eyes never left the mark on Maeve's shoulder. His fingers traced the silver pattern with reverence, following the lines that spiraled inward to the crown symbol. His touch was gentle, but Maeve felt power in it. The same overwhelming force she'd sensed when he was dying in her cabin. You didn't know because I marked her while fevered and barely conscious, Rain said, his voice carrying to the entire crowd. I was near death, saved only by her compassion and skill. My wolf recognized what my human mind couldn't process in that state. She was mine, destined by the moon goddess herself, so my wolf acted on instinct and marked her before I could stop it. He turned to face Maeve fully, and she saw regret in his eyes alongside the fierce possessiveness. I need to explain. I need to tell you what happened after I left your cabin. You don't owe me explanations, Maeve whispered, though part of her desperately wanted to hear them. I owe you everything. Rain's hand moved to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I woke that morning and realized what my wolf had done. I'd marked you without your consent, without even speaking to you properly. I was horrified at myself, but I also knew I couldn't stay. Because of the war, Maeve said, remembering what the merchant had told her months ago. Yes. The attack that nearly killed me, the one you saved me from, was part of a larger conspiracy. 3 packs were in open rebellion, trying to overthrow the crown. I had to return immediately to lead the defense of the kingdom. Every hour I delayed meant more of my wolves dying. Rain's voice roughened with emotion. I wanted to take you with me, to bring you to the capital where you'd be safe and honored, but bringing you into a war zone, into a palace full of traitors and assassins, would have been a death sentence. So I left you gold and ran like a coward, planning to end the war quickly and come back for you. But the war didn't end quickly, Maeve said softly. No. It took 6 months of brutal fighting to crush the rebellion completely. 6 months where I couldn't leave the capital, couldn't come back for you, couldn't even send messages. His expression darkened. I tried. Moon Goddess knows I tried. I sent 5 different messengers with letters explaining everything, asking you to wait for me. All 5 were intercepted and killed by rebel spies monitoring the roads. The crowd was utterly silent, hanging on every word. This was history unfolding before them, the Alpha King revealing secrets that would be told and retold for generations. I had to keep you secret, Rain continued. The rebels would have used you against me if they'd discovered my mate lived alone and unprotected on the frontier. So I sent guards to watch over you from a distance, keeping you safe without revealing themselves. Every day I couldn't come for you was torture. The bond pulled at me constantly, showing me fragments of your life, your loneliness, your quiet strength, your kindness to those who couldn't pay you. Maeve's breath caught. You felt all that? Through the mark? Every emotion, every moment of pain or joy. It flows one direction more strongly from me to you. But I still sensed you, still knew when you were troubled or afraid. His eyes burned into hers. And today, an hour ago, I felt such sudden anguish from you that I thought you were dying. I was in a council meeting 100 miles from here. I shifted mid-sentence and ran, using the old royal magic that lets Alpha Kings traverse distances in impossible time. Nothing could have kept me from you. Maeve felt dizzy. The mark, the connection she'd felt all these months, had been real. He'd known about her, thought about her, tried to reach her. She hadn't been forgotten. But why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would you want me? I'm nobody. A rejected Omega with no family, no status. Osric was right about my scent. Other alphas have sensed the same weakness in me. I can't give you what a king needs from his mate. Rain's expression turned fierce. Osric is a fool who wouldn't recognize true power if it bit him. He raised his voice again, addressing the crowd. Do you want to know why her scent seemed wrong to lesser alphas? Because she's not meant for lesser alphas. She's a selective omega, born to mate only with the strongest wolf in the kingdom. Her scent repels all others by design, marking her as mine and mine alone. He turned back to Osric, who looked like he wanted to disappear. You sensed weakness? You sensed nothing of the sort. You sensed incompatibility. Your wolf knew, even if your human mind didn't, that she was far beyond your reach. You rejected her, because your instincts told you she would destroy you if you tried to claim her. And you were right to be afraid. Osric fell to his knees. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I didn't understand. Please, I meant no insult to the crown. But you did mean insult to her. Rain's voice had gone cold. You humiliated her publicly, not once but twice. You called her broken, worthless, defective. You mocked her for the very thing that makes her sacred. What punishment fits such an offense? The crowd held its collective breath. Even Elowen had gone silent, her earlier smugness replaced by terror. Maeve found her voice. Rain, please, don't do this for me. He's not worth your anger. He hurt you. The simple statement carried absolute conviction. He made you cry. I felt your pain across 100 miles, and it brought me here ready to tear apart anyone who'd caused it. How can I let that go unpunished? Because I'm asking you to show mercy. Maeve placed her hand over his, still resting against her shoulder. I don't want my first act as your acknowledged mate to be causing suffering, even to those who hurt me. Please. Rain studied her face for a long moment. Then he turned back to Osric, and his voice rang with command that made every shifter in the marketplace bare their neck in submission. Osric of Silver Creek Pack, for the crime of publicly humiliating the Alpha King's mate, I strip you of your title and rank. You are no longer an alpha. Your lands are forfeit to the crown. You are banished from all territories under my rule, effective immediately. If you are found within kingdom boundaries after sunset tonight, the penalty is death. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Osric's voice was barely a whisper. All his pride, all his status, gone in an instant. Rain's eyes moved to Elowen, who shrank back. And you participated in the cruelty, enjoyed it. You called my mate defective. What pack do you belong to? Ironwood, Your Majesty. Elowen was crying now, her beautiful face blotchy with tears. Please, I didn't know who she was. I would never have... But you did, and ignorance is no excuse for cruelty. Rain's judgment was final. You are banned from court and all royal events for the remainder of your life. Your family's trade agreements with the crown are revoked, and I will personally ensure that every alpha in this kingdom knows what you did here today. You'll find your marriage prospects significantly diminished. Elowen collapsed beside Osric, sobbing. The crowd murmured, some in satisfaction at seeing justice done, others in fear of the king's power. Rain addressed the marketplace at large. Let this be known throughout the realm. Maeve of the Frontier is my true mate, marked by my wolf and blessed by the moon goddess. She will be Luna and Queen. Anyone who offers her disrespect offers it to me personally, and will answer for it accordingly. Then he turned back to Maeve, and his expression softened completely. All the hard edges of command fell away, leaving only the man who'd looked at her with amber eyes in her cabin 6 months ago. I know this is sudden, he said quietly, meant only for her ears. I know I'm asking too much, appearing in your life and turning everything upside down. But I'm asking anyway. Will you accept the bond publicly? Will you come with me and be my Luna? I can't promise it will be easy. Court politics are vicious, and there will be those who question your worthiness. But I can promise I'll stand beside you through all of it. I can promise you'll never face cruelty alone again. Maeve looked at him. This impossible king who'd burst into her quiet life and claimed her before hundreds of witnesses. 6 months ago, she'd saved a dying wolf without expecting anything in return. Now that wolf was offering her everything she'd never dared to dream of. But the dreams didn't matter. What mattered was the truth she could see in his eyes. The same truth she'd felt through the mark all these months. He genuinely wanted her. Not for political advantage or heir production, but because some fundamental part of him recognized her as his match. I'm terrified, she admitted. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know anything about courts or politics. I'm just a healer. You're not just anything. Rain's thumb traced her cheekbone. You're the woman who risked her life to save a stranger, who used her own life force to heal me without knowing who I was, who lived alone for 2 years rather than accept being treated as less than your worth. That's exactly the kind of strength a queen needs. What about the mark? You said you didn't mean to place it, that your wolf acted without your control. Do you regret it? Never. The word was absolute. I regret the manner of it, regret not being conscious enough to do it properly. But I don't regret the bond itself. These 6 months apart proved that to me. Every day without you felt wrong, incomplete. I want you, Maeve, not because my wolf marked you in a fever dream, but because you're brave and compassionate and stronger than you know. Will you have me? Around them, the marketplace held its breath. This was a moment that would be remembered, the Alpha King kneeling before his mate in a humble frontier town, asking rather than commanding. Maeve thought about her lonely cabin, the isolation she'd wrapped around herself like armor. She thought about 2 years of telling herself she was better off alone, that wanting more would only lead to pain. And she realized that walls she'd built to protect herself had also become her prison. Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes, I accept the bond. I'll be your Luna. The marketplace erupted in cheers. Rain's face broke into a smile of such pure joy that it transformed him, made him look young despite the weight of his crown. He pulled Maeve into his arms and kissed her, not caring about the crowd or propriety or anything except the woman he'd crossed a kingdom to reach. The bond between them flared to life completely, no longer one-sided, but flowing freely in both directions. Maeve felt his relief, his happiness, his fierce determination to protect her always, and he felt hers, the wonder and fear and cautious hope all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the mark on Maeve's shoulder was glowing so brightly it was visible through her dress. Silver light pulsed in time with their heartbeats, announcing their bond to anyone with eyes to see. Rain's royal guard arrived then, 20 elite warriors who'd clearly run the entire distance trying to keep up with their king. They formed a protective circle around Rain and Maeve, professional despite their obvious exhaustion. My apologies for rushing off, Garrett, Rain said to a silver-haired warrior who was clearly the guard captain. But my mate was in distress. I trust you can manage the remaining council matters? Of course, Your Majesty. Garrett's eyes moved to Maeve with curiosity and respect. My lady, it's an honor to finally meet you. The king has spoken of little else these past months. Maeve felt her cheeks heat. The honor is mine, Captain. Rain turned to address the crowd one final time. The festival continues. Celebrate with food and drink on the crown's coin. Today is a day of joy. That announcement brought fresh cheers. Rain gestured to his guards, who began organizing payment to the various vendors. Then he turned to Maeve with a question in his eyes. Your cabin. Do you need to return there? Gather your belongings? Ah, yes. My mother's books, my supplies. I can't just leave everything. Then we'll send a wagon and escorts to collect it all properly. Rain's hand found hers, threading their fingers together. But first, I need to take you somewhere safe. Somewhere I can explain everything properly, without an audience. Will you trust me? Maeve looked at their joined hands, at the mark that bound them, at the impossible man who'd turned her world upside down in the space of an hour. She'd spent 2 years building walls to keep herself safe from disappointment. But safety and happiness weren't the same thing. I'll trust you, she said. Rain lifted her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Maeve's startled laugh made him grin. You're not walking, not today. Today I carry what's mine. And with the crowd cheering and Osric watching in bitter defeat, the Alpha King carried his mate away from the marketplace toward a future neither of them could have predicted, bound together by a mark that had started as accident and transformed into destiny. Chapter 7. The Path Forward. Rain carried Maeve through Millbrook to the edge of town where his guard had set up a temporary camp. It was a small operation, just enough tents for 20 warriors and their Alpha King, but it was clearly military in organization. Everything had its place, from weapons stacked in neat rows to horses tethered in a precise line. He set her down gently in the largest tent, which held a bed, a table covered in maps, and little else. Campaign quarters, stripped of all comfort. Maeve realized with a jolt that Rain had probably been living like this for months, moving from battle to battle with no real rest. "I know it's not much," he said, reading her expression. "The royal palace is 2 days' ride north. But I needed to speak with you privately before we face court politics and scrutiny." Maeve sat on the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly unsteady. The reality of what had just happened was catching up with her. "I still can't quite believe you're real. That any of this is real." Rain knelt before her, bringing them eye to eye. "I'm real. This is real. And I owe you a proper explanation of what happened 6 months ago and why I did what I did." "You were fevered," Maeve said. "Your wolf marked me by instinct. You already told the crowd that." "That's true, but not the complete truth." Rain took her hands in his. "I need you to understand something about Alpha Kings. We're different from other alphas, not just in power, but in nature. When we find our true mates, the bond manifests physically in our marking. The crown appears, a symbol visible to all shifters that this person is destined to rule beside us." He gestured to her shoulder. "That crown appeared because you are my true mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. My wolf knew it the moment you touched me, but here's what I need to apologize for. Even fevered, even half dead, I felt the bond forming. And instead of fighting it, instead of waiting until I could ask you properly, I let my wolf complete the marking." "Why?" Maeve asked. "Why not wait?" "Because I was terrified." The admission seemed to cost him. "I was dying, Maeve. I could feel death circling closer with every heartbeat. And the thought of dying without claiming you, without making sure you were protected by my mark, was unbearable. So I let my wolf act. I marked you while you slept, because I couldn't stand the idea of leaving you unprotected in this world." He looked down at their joined hands. "It was selfish. I bound you to me without permission, without even giving you a choice. I've regretted that every day since. Even as I've been grateful for the bond itself. You deserved better than a king who claimed you in the dark while you were unconscious." Maeve's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "You thought you were dying. You were trying to protect me the only way you could. I understand that. Understanding doesn't make it right." Rain met her eyes again. "So I'm asking now, properly. Maeve, will you accept my mark? Will you allow me to complete the bond as it should have been done from the start?" "I already accepted in the marketplace," she reminded him. "That was public acceptance, political necessity. This is private, personal. This is me asking you. The woman who saved my life, if you'll have me. The man who bungled everything from the first moment. No crowds, no pressure. Just us." Maeve studied his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the confidence. This was Rain without the crown, without the command voice that made others submit. Just a man asking a woman for a chance. "I'm still afraid," she admitted. "Afraid I won't be good enough. That I'll fail as Luna. That the court will see through me and realize I'm just a frontier healer playing at royalty. Then we'll be afraid together." Rain's thumb stroked across her knuckles. "Because I'm terrified too. Terrified I'll disappoint you. That you'll regret binding yourself to a king who lives half his life at war. That the crown will crush the kindness I saw in you when you healed a dying wolf without asking for anything in return." "You're the Alpha King," Maeve said. "You're not supposed to be afraid of anything. Being king doesn't make me fearless. It just means I can't show my fear to anyone except you." He smiled slightly. "That's what mates are for. Being the one person in the world who sees all of you, strength and weakness together, and chooses you anyway." Maeve thought about the lonely years in her cabin, the walls she'd built around her heart. Rain was offering to tear those walls down, to let her be vulnerable and afraid and imperfect. It was terrifying and tempting in equal measure. "Yes," she said finally. "I accept your mark. I choose you, Rain. Not the king, just the man." Relief flooded his expression. "Thank you." He stood, drawing her to her feet. "The marking is sacred. It requires your full consent and participation. Are you ready?" Maeve nodded, her heart racing. Rain gently pushed the neck of her dress aside, exposing her left shoulder where the silver mark glowed softly. He traced the pattern with his fingers, and she felt the bond pulse between them. "This is yours already. he said softly. But now I'll add my mark to yours, completing the bond in both directions. He shifted his attention to her right shoulder, the unmarked one. Maeve understood what he was offering. A choice to let him mark her. Symmetry to balance the mark he'd placed without permission. It will hurt for a moment, Rain warned. But then you'll feel the bond solidify completely. You'll be able to sense me as clearly as I sense you. Distance won't matter. Emotion, thoughts, sometimes even images will pass between us. We'll be truly mated, bound at a level deeper than flesh or bone. I trust you, Maeve whispered. Rain's eyes glowed amber, his wolf rising to the surface. He leaned down and pressed his mouth to her right shoulder, and Maeve felt the sharp pressure of teeth against her skin. Not deep enough to truly wound, but enough to mark. Power exploded between them. The bond that had been one-sided suddenly became a circuit, energy flowing freely in both directions. Maeve gasped as Rain's emotions flooded into her. His fierce possessiveness, his relief, his joy, his determination to protect her always. And underneath it all, something deeper. Love, still new and fragile but growing stronger by the moment. And he felt hers, too. She knew it by the way his arms tightened around her, by the sound he made low in his throat. He felt her fear and her courage, her loneliness and her hope, her tentative, growing affection for this impossible man who'd crashed into her life and claimed her. When he pulled back, both her shoulders bore matching marks. The left with its silver crown, the right with a fresh mark that was already beginning to glow with the same ethereal light. They were matched, balanced, completed. How do you feel? Rain asked, his voice rough. Like I'm not alone anymore. Maeve said truthfully. Like there's someone on the other end of a rope I didn't know I was holding. That's the bond. He pulled her close, wrapping her in his warmth. You'll never be alone again, Maeve. Whatever comes, we face it together. They stayed like that for a long moment, letting the bond settle between them. Maeve could feel Rain's heartbeat, strong and steady, could sense his presence in her mind. Not intrusive, but comforting, a constant reminder that she was no longer facing the world on her own. A discreet cough from outside the tent broke the moment. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but we need to discuss logistics. Rain sighed. Of course we do. Enter, Garrett. The guard captain ducked into the tent, his eyes respectfully averted from where Rain held Maeve. The lady's belongings. You mentioned sending for them. Yes. I want a wagon and 6 guards dispatched to her cabin immediately. Collect everything, her books, her supplies, her personal items. Treat it all as if it were treasure, because to her it is. Rain's tone made it clear this was non-negotiable. Of course, Your Majesty. I'll lead the party myself. Garrett paused. And the matter of Osric and his companion? They're to be escorted to the kingdom's border by tomorrow evening. Make it clear that they're never to return. If anyone asks, tell them exile was mercy. I wanted their heads. Maeve felt a chill at the cold finality in Rain's voice. This was the king speaking. The man who'd spent 6 months crushing a rebellion. She was seeing the edge that made others fear him. But through the bond, she also felt his restraint. He truly had wanted to kill Osric for hurting her. He'd held back only because she'd asked, and it had cost him to show that mercy. Understood, Your Majesty. Garrett glanced at Maeve. My lady, if I may say, the men are honored to serve you. Word has already spread about how you saved the king's life. You're going to be a legend in the royal guard. I only did what any healer would do, Maeve said, uncomfortable with the praise. No, Rain corrected gently. You did what few would dare. You risked your safety for a stranger, used your own life force to heal someone you'd never met. That's not ordinary healing, Maeve. That's heroism. After Garrett left to organize the retrieval of her belongings, Rain showed Maeve around the small camp. The warriors treated her with careful respect, bowing when she passed. It was surreal and overwhelming. These battle-hardened men acknowledging her as their future queen. They're good wolves, Rain said as they walked. Every one of them volunteered for the war, fought beside me through the worst of it. 20 started with me 6 months ago. 19 remain. We lost Samuel in the final battle, and his death still haunts me. Maeve heard the grief in his voice and squeezed his hand. Through the bond, she felt the weight he carried, the responsibility for every life lost under his command. "You can't save everyone," she said softly. "I learned that as a healer. Sometimes people die despite our best efforts, and we have to live with that failure. Knowing that doesn't make it easier." "No," Maeve agreed, "but carrying the weight honors them. It means their deaths mattered, that you remember them." Rain stopped walking and looked at her with something like wonder. "How do you do that? Say exactly what I need to hear?" "I don't know. Maybe that's what mates are for, too." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking for the first time. Rain told her about the war, about the betrayals that had cut deep, about his fears for the kingdom. Maeve told him about her mother's death, about the rejection and isolation, about the small joys she'd found in her solitary life. By the time evening fell, Maeve felt like she actually knew the man she'd bound herself to. Not the king, not the legend, but Rain, a man who carried too much responsibility and hid his loneliness behind duty. A man who'd crossed a kingdom because he felt his mate's pain. A man who was trying his best and terrified of failing. That night, Maeve slept in Rain's tent, in his arms, feeling safe for the first time in years. The bond hummed contentedly between them, and through it, she felt his matching peace. Both of them had been alone for so long. Now they'd found their way to each other through accident and destiny combined. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Garrett returned with a wagon full of Maeve's belongings, everything carefully packed as Rain had ordered. Seeing her mother's books and her small treasures made Maeve's throat tight with emotion. "We leave for the capital today," Rain told her over breakfast. 2 days' ride, faster if we push. I need to present you to the court formally. Begin your education in politics and protocol. It's going to be overwhelming." "I know." Maeve took a steadying breath. "But I'm not facing it alone anymore." Rain smiled and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Never alone again. They broke camp within the hour. Maeve rode beside Rain on a gentle mare, surrounded by the royal guard. The journey north took them through increasingly populated territory, past villages where people stopped their work to stare at the passing king and his newly claimed mate. Word had already spread from Millbrook. By the time they stopped for the night at a way station, people were gathering just to catch a glimpse of the frontier healer who'd become their future queen. "You're going to have to get used to this," Rain said as they watched the crowd from a window. "You're part of history now. The Omega who saved the Alpha King and became his Luna. They'll tell stories about you for generations." Maeve shook her head in disbelief. "A month ago, I was selling herb jars at market. How did this become my life?" "You pulled a dying wolf into your cabin and refused to let him die," Rain said simply. Everything else followed from that choice. On the second day, they crested a hill, and Maeve saw the capital city for the first time. It sprawled across a valley, thousands of buildings surrounding a castle that rose like a crown of stone and timber. The royal palace was massive, flying banners that snapped in the wind. "That's home now," Rain said. "Are you ready?" Maeve thought about her lonely cabin, her isolated life, the years she'd spent believing she was broken and worthless. She thought about the mark on her shoulder, the bond connecting her to this impossible king, the future spreading before her like an unwritten page. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but yes, I'm ready." Rain took her hand as they rode down toward the city gates, toward the palace, toward the life waiting for them both. Behind them, the royal guard followed, protecting the king and his mate. Ahead, the capital prepared to meet its new Luna, the frontier healer and the Alpha King, bound by accident and choice, riding together into whatever came next. Chapter 8. Crown and Consequence. 3 months after Rain had carried Maeve from the Millbrook marketplace, she stood in the grand hall of the royal palace, wearing a gown of white silk embroidered with silver thread that matched the marks on her shoulders. Her dark hair had been arranged in elaborate braids woven with white flowers, and a delicate circlet of silver rested on her brow. Today, she would be crowned Luna. Today, she would become queen. The hall was packed with representatives from every pack in the kingdom. Hundreds of wolves in their finest clothes, all gathered to witness the coronation of a woman most of them had never heard of until 3 months ago. Maeve could feel their eyes on her, assessing, judging, questioning whether a frontier healer was worthy of standing beside their king. Through the bond, she felt Rain's steady presence. He stood at the front of the hall beside the throne, dressed in ceremonial robes that marked him as Alpha King. His amber eyes found hers across the distance, and she felt his reassurance flow through their connection. "You're not alone. I'm here. We're doing this together." Maeve took a deep breath and began the long walk down the aisle. Each step felt momentous, carrying her from one life into another. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment. 3 months of learning court protocol, pack politics, and the complex dance of ruling a kingdom. 3 months of proving to skeptical nobles that she was more than just a healer who'd gotten lucky. The past months hadn't been easy. Court life was everything Maeve had feared and more. The nobles watched her constantly, looking for mistakes. Some questioned her openly, wondering why Rain hadn't chosen a mate from among the high-born Omega daughters presented to him over the years. Others whispered that she'd used her healing gifts to enchant the king, that the bond wasn't real, but manufactured through magic. Rain had wanted to punish those who spoke against her, but Maeve had stopped him. "Let them talk," she'd said. "Words can't hurt me anymore. I'll prove my worth through actions, not by silencing my critics." So she'd thrown herself into learning everything required of a Luna. She studied pack law with Rain's advisors, learning the intricate web of alliances and obligations that held the kingdom together. She met with healers from across the realm, sharing knowledge and establishing medical programs that would bring care to even the poorest villages. She attended council meetings and diplomatic functions, standing silent but observant beside Rain as he governed. Slowly, opinions had begun to shift. The nobles saw her dedication, her genuine desire to serve the kingdom. The common people heard stories of the Luna who'd once lived as they did, who understood their struggles because she'd lived them. Support grew, tentative at first, but strengthening day by day. But there were still those who resisted. As Maeve reached the front of the hall and knelt before Rain, she could see disapproval on some faces in the crowd. Not everyone believed a rejected Omega deserved to be queen. Rain took the ceremonial crown from a velvet cushion held by Garrett. It was a delicate thing of silver and moonstone, designed specifically for Maeve. Unlike the heavy gold crown that marked Rain as king, hers was meant to represent the Luna's role as healer and protector of the kingdom's heart. "Maeve of the frontier," Rain's voice carried to every corner of the hall. "3 months ago, I claimed you as my mate before witnesses in Millbrook. Today, I claim you again before the assembled packs of this kingdom. Do you accept the responsibilities of Luna? Will you stand beside me as queen, as partner in all things, as the heart that balances the crown's judgment?" This was the moment Maeve had been preparing for. She raised her head and met Rain's eyes, letting everyone see the certainty in her expression. "I accept," she said clearly. "I will serve this kingdom with all my strength. I will protect its people as I would my own pack. I will stand beside you, Rain, through whatever trials come. This I swear before the moon goddess, and all gathered here as witnesses." Rain placed the crown on her head, and Maeve felt the weight of it settle. Not just the physical weight of silver and stone, but the responsibility it represented. Every wolf in the kingdom would look to her now for guidance, healing, and wisdom. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Rise, Luna Maeve," Rain said, offering his hand. "My mate, my queen, my heart." Maeve stood, and the hall erupted in cheers. Not everyone cheered, she noticed. Some faces remained skeptical or disapproving. But enough support rang out to make the hall shake with the sound. The ceremony continued with ritual blessings and formal oaths. Maeve repeated the ancient words that bound her to the crown and the kingdom. When Rain moved to her right side and gently pulled aside the fabric covering her shoulder, exposing the mark he'd placed there 3 months ago, gasps echoed through the hall. Both marks were visible now, glowing softly in the candlelight. The left shoulder with its silver crown symbol, the right with Rain's claiming mark. They pulsed in synchronization, proof of the bond that connected king and queen at the deepest level. "Behold the mate marks," declared the elderly pack priestess conducting the ceremony, placed by the moon goddess herself, binding these two souls for all time. What the goddess has joined, no wolf may separate. The crowd murmured in awe. Even those who doubted the legitimacy of the bond couldn't argue with visible proof of divine approval. After the formal coronation came the feast. Long tables filled the great hall, laden with food and drink. Nobles and commoners mixed more freely during festivals, the rigid hierarchy relaxing for one night of celebration. Maeve sat beside Rain at the high table, feeling overwhelmed by the noise and spectacle. "You're doing wonderfully," Rain murmured, his hand finding hers under the table. Through the bond, she felt his pride in her, his love that had grown from tentative affection into something solid and real over the past months. "I keep waiting for someone to realize I have no idea what I'm doing," Maeve confessed quietly. "That's the secret of ruling. No one really knows what they're doing. We're all just trying our best and hoping it works out." Rain squeezed her hand. "But you're not just trying, Maeve. You're succeeding. The healers adore you. The common people see you as one of their own who rose to greatness. Even the nobles are coming around. Not all of them. No," Rain agreed. "But those who matter are. The ones whose opinions are worth having recognize your value." The feast continued late into the night. Maeve danced with Rain, their first public dance as crowned mates. She met with healers who'd traveled from distant territories specifically to pledge their support to their new Luna. She accepted congratulations from nobles who'd been skeptical but were willing to give her a chance. And through it all, the bond hummed contentedly between her and Rain, a constant reminder that whatever happened, they faced it together. When the celebrations finally wound down near dawn, Rain led Maeve to their private chambers. The royal suite was enormous compared to her frontier cabin, but Maeve had filled it with familiar things. Her mother's books lined one wall. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the space with familiar scents. It was a blend of royal luxury and healer practicality. "How do you feel?" Rain asked, helping her remove the heavy crown. "Like I just lived through the most terrifying night of my life," Maeve admitted, "but also proud. I didn't embarrass you or the kingdom. I think I actually managed to act like a queen. You didn't act like anything. You were yourself, and that's exactly what they needed to see." Rain pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I'm so proud of you, Maeve. These 3 months, watching you grow into this role, watching you win over people who were determined to dislike you. It's been extraordinary." Maeve wrapped her arms around him. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without feeling you through the bond, knowing you believed in me even when I doubted myself." "That's what mates do," Rain said, echoing her words from months ago. "We hold each other up when the weight gets too heavy to bear alone." They stayed like that for a long moment. Two people who'd found each other through impossible circumstances and chosen to build something real from accident and destiny. A knock at the door interrupted them. Garrett's voice came through. "Apologies, Your Majesties, but there's a matter requiring immediate attention." Rain sighed. "Ruling never stops, even at dawn after a coronation." "Enter." Garrett came in, his expression serious. "Your Majesty, your Luna. We've received word that Osric has been spotted attempting to cross back into kingdom territory. He was apprehended by border guards and is being held for judgment." Maeve felt Rain's anger spike through the bond. "I gave him exile with the warning that return meant death. He chose to ignore that warning. What do you want done with him?" Garrett asked. Rain looked at Maeve. "He's your former mate, the one who rejected and humiliated you. You have the right to decide his fate." Maeve's first instinct was mercy, but she'd learned over the past 3 months that mercy needed to be balanced with justice, that a ruler who never enforced consequences invited chaos. Osric had been given a chance, a way to live despite his crimes. He'd chosen to throw that chance away. "Why did he return?" she asked Garrett. "He claimed he has information about remaining rebel sympathizers, said he would only speak to the king directly." "It's a lie," Rain said immediately, an attempt to gain audience and plead for reinstatement. "I've seen it before from exiles desperate to return home." But Maeve felt uncertain. What if he's telling the truth? What if there is information we need? Then we extract it through other means. "I won't give him the satisfaction of an audience after what he did to you." Maeve understood Rain's protective fury, but she'd learned that emotion couldn't always guide a ruler's decisions. Question him, she told Garrett. If he has legitimate information, we need it. If he's lying, then enforce the original sentence. But we have to be certain. Garrett bowed and left to carry out her orders. Rain looked at Maeve with a mixture of pride and frustration. You're too merciful sometimes. Maybe, Maeve agreed. But I'd rather err on the side of mercy than cruelty. That doesn't mean I'm weak. It means I choose to be certain before taking a life. You're going to be a better queen than I am a king, Rain said softly. No, we're going to be good rulers together, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses. 3 days later, Garrett reported that Osric had indeed been lying. He'd had no information about rebels, only a desperate hope that he could talk his way back into the kingdom. Maeve gave the order herself to enforce the exile sentence. She didn't take joy in it, but she didn't shy away from the necessity either. The weeks following the coronation settled into a routine. Maeve spent her mornings working with healers, establishing the medical programs she'd envisioned. She spent afternoons in council meetings, learning the intricacies of governance. Evenings were for diplomatic functions, building relationships with noble families and pack leaders. She didn't forget Petra in Millbrook either. One of her first quiet decrees ensured the palace kitchens bought bread from Petra's ovens whenever her wagons reached the capital. A small way of repaying the woman who had once pushed her toward the world again. And nights were for Rain, for quiet moments when they could shed their crowns and be simply mates, talking and laughing and finding comfort in each other. One evening, 2 months after the coronation, Maeve stood in the garden behind the palace. It reminded her of the forest near her cabin, wild and untamed despite being within the castle walls. She'd been feeling strange all day, a peculiar flutter in her stomach that wouldn't settle. Rain found her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind. What are you thinking about? The future, Maeve said honestly. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. Our future. It took Rain a moment to understand. When he did, his sharp intake of breath made Maeve smile. You're certain? The healer confirmed it this morning. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Maeve turned in his arms to see his face. We're going to have a child. The first heir born to the kingdom in 2 generations. Rain's expression cycled through shock, joy, and fierce protectiveness in the space of seconds. A child. Our child. Are you happy? Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He kissed her deeply, pouring everything he felt through the bond. Love and wonder and a determination to protect them both that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. When they broke apart, both breathless, Rain rested his hand on her stomach with reverence. You're going to be an incredible mother. And you'll be an incredible father, Maeve said. We'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else. They stood together in the garden as twilight deepened around them, a frontier healer and an alpha king, bound by marks on their shoulders and love in their hearts, preparing to welcome new life into a kingdom finally at peace. The journey from Maeve's lonely cabin to the palace gardens had been impossible and perfect in equal measure, guided by accident and choice, by destiny and determination. And as Rain held her close, their child growing between them and the bond singing with shared joy, Maeve finally understood what her mother had tried to tell her years ago. Sometimes the greatest gifts came wrapped in unexpected packages. Sometimes healing meant being brave enough to let yourself be healed. Sometimes the most broken things, when given love and time, became the strongest. She'd been rejected, isolated, convinced of her own worthlessness. Now she wore a crown and carried the future of the kingdom beneath her heart. The moon goddess worked in mysterious ways, turning endings into beginnings and despair into hope. Maeve smiled and leaned into Rain's embrace, feeling completely and utterly home. In the end,